For today's video, I'll be sharing my fall book recommendations. All of these books, even though they're very different from one another, they share that same really creepy, dark, haunting atmosphere. And so hopefully you'll find a book that sounds interesting enough for you to pick up. My first book recommendation is After Dark by Haruki Murakami. If you're someone who likes books with a really dreamy, dark atmosphere, then I believe you'll really enjoy this book. The story itself does not tie up really nicely, and there are a few loose ends, but that's part of the reason why I find it so appealing. The fact that not everything is accounted for. But there are individuals that would not enjoy that aspect of a story, and so perhaps for those, I would not recommend a book like this. If you haven't tried any of his other works and you're looking to see whether or not you would enjoy his writing, then I do believe this is a good place to start. The story itself transpires in the span of one day, from midnight to dawn, and you get to meet a wide array of characters in Tokyo. Essentially, you're alternating between two different worlds, and in the beginning it's unclear how they're connected, but in the end you kind of get an idea of how those two worlds come together. The story starts off with you meeting this one student. She has a sister, and months ago her sister went to sleep and she never woke up again. And so part of it, you're following the student in the real world, and then the other part is you're sort of in this dreamlike world. The story is filled with beautiful writing, and it really makes you think. I just really enjoyed the journey in which this book took me. The next book is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness, illustrated by Jim Kay. If you're an individual who really likes stories within stories, then I think this is the perfect read for you. It's also a really quick read, and so if you want something that you could read in one sitting, then I highly recommend it. So the story itself follows a young boy, his name is Connor, and for several days he's visited by this monster. This monster shares stories with Connor, and the story sort of goes from there. It's an exploration of grief, which is a really difficult topic to tackle, but I believe this book does it beautifully. And one of the things I really liked about this book are the illustrations. For the majority of them, they incorporate charcoal. They add to the atmosphere that the book is trying to create. I genuinely think I wouldn't enjoy this book as much without those illustrations, even though the story itself is solid and I do really like it, but the illustrations just add so much to the story itself. The next two books are perfect if you're in the mood for something spooky and dark. They're both by Frances Hardinge, and they're both middle grade books. The first one is The Cuckoo Song, and someone had described this book as a dark fairy tale, and I definitely agree. Essentially, you follow Tris, who is a young girl. She wakes up after an accident. Something feels off. She has an insatiable hunger. Regardless of how much she eats, she doesn't get full. And every time she wakes up, there's leaves in her hair, and her tears are cobwebs. You as the reader go on this journey with Tris to figure out what had happened to her. The story itself tackles topics of identity and war, which are definitely not things that I thought I would read about when I picked up the book, but it was a really pleasant surprise nonetheless. I highly recommend this book if you're in the mood for something a little dark, a little spooky, but ultimately really enjoyable. The next one is The Lye Tree, and this one is my favorite of the two, just because I'm a huge fan of magical realism, and I would consider this book magical realism, meaning that there's no outright magic, but there are fantastical elements. In this book, you follow Faith, who again is a young girl. She wants to be a scientist just like her father, but in her age, or in her time period, that's something really looked down upon, and it's not a pursuit considered suitable for young women, or women in general. She comes to know of the existence of this tree, and it seems as if every time you tell this tree a lie, it rewards you with a truth of equal gravity to the lie. So the bigger the lie, the bigger the truth, or so it seems. It explores topics of passion and science, and so this was a really interesting read. The thing that I liked most about this book are definitely the characters, and so if you're like me and you really enjoy stories that are character driven, then I think this book might be the one for you. Just because all of the characters, they weren't one-dimensional. They all had their own motives, their own thoughts, their own feelings. They weren't just there to drive the plot along for the main character. The next two works are by Oscar Wilde. If you're in the mood for a book with suspense and horror, then this one is perfect for you. Essentially, if you're not aware of the story, it follows Dorian Gray, who is a handsome young man. When he sees this portrait of himself, he becomes envious of the portrait just because, unlike him, his youth is captured for eternity within this portrait, while his own body is going to deteriorate with age. And so he wishes that it was the opposite, that he remained the same while the portrait was the one to age. And the story goes on from there. Really enjoyed the characters within this book, and if you haven't picked it up yet, I highly recommend it. The next of his works is a poetry collection. I find Oscar Wilde's writing to be really haunting and beautiful, which is what I find most appealing about it. A poem in particular that I really recommend is the Ballad of Reading Jail. He wrote this poem while in exile after imprisonment for 2 years, and it depicts a lot of his experiences in jail. It's a beautiful story that tackles imprisonment, isolation, and love, amongst other topics, and the poem itself is very lyrical. And so if you're a fan like me of those types of poetries, the ones that just sound like music when you read them, then I believe you'll like this poem. Yet each man kills the thing he loves, by each let this be heard. Some do it with a bitter look, some with a flattering word. The coward does it with a kiss, the brave man with a sword. Some kill their love when they are young, and some when they are old. Some strangle with the hands of lust, some with the hands of gold. The kindest use a knife because the dead so soon grow cold. Some love too little, some too long, some sell and others buy. Some do the deed with many tears, and some without a sigh. For each man kills the thing he loves, yet each man does not die.